don't think anybody really does know what to do about Libya, for the very simple reason that we're watching a civil war play out. We have a beastly dictator. He was a beastly dictator before we decided to normalize relations to him, I think to the lasting discredit of the Bush administration. He was a beastly dictator while we had normalized relations with him under Bush and Obama. He's a beastly dictator now, when we again are recognizing him as such. And interestingly enough, one of the leaders of the opposition, who presumably is informed by one of his colleagues who was formerly the interior minister of the Gaddafi regime, says explicitly the guy was personally responsible for ordering the attack on Panam 103. So, I mean, this is a terrible guy. On the other hand, the administration is confronted by the fact that the opposition is, at best, it's unclear who they are, and at worst, it's pretty clear, to me at least, that they're likely to be the Islamists who are waiting to establish yet another sort of theocratic operation in another country in the Middle East. And that, I think, argues for being very cautious about arming or recognizing or otherwise enabling them. So while I'm generally critical of the Obama administration on this one, I think the fact that they have muddled along is less bad than what they might have done, which was to throw, arms and military assets into the fight on behalf of people who I think would probably wind up using them against us in due course.
What leads you to say that possibly the opposition has an Islamist background?
Well, a couple of things. I think we have seen coming from the Islamists the enthusiasm for toppling Gaddafi. Now, that's not unique to them. But we've also had Gaddafi decried as an enemy of Allah. We've also had, people who are in the streets who are supporting this overthrow of Gaddafi, arguing that this is basically God's will, this is what must be done for Allah. But most importantly, as in every single one of these countries, where we're seeing this kind of ferment, in some cases leading to the actual overthrow of the previous government, in other cases simply turmoil, perhaps preparatory to the overthrow of the government. I think what typically happens in revolutions is likely to eventuate, namely that the most disciplined, the most organized, and the most ruthless will come to the fore. And in that being the case, I think we'll see the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, most likely be the ones who win out. So because those are absolutely positively enemies of the United States, these Islamists, I think it, again, argues for caution in either recognizing them or arming them.
The president yesterday addressed the topic of Libya during a news conference. Here's what he had to say, and get your response to that.
Sure.
As I said before, it is in the United States' interest and the interest of the people of Libya that Gaddafi leave. And we are going to do we're going to take a wide range of actions to try to bring about that outcome. When you say, is it ever acceptable? I mean, I think what you're asking is, are we going to engage in any potential military action to make that happen? And as I said before, when it comes to U.S. military actions, whether it's a no-fly zone or other options, you've got to balance costs versus benefits. And I don't take those decisions lightly.
For the latter part, as far as his analysis of cost versus benefit, and that's the no-fly zone, why not put one in place? Or should we put one in place?
Well, I think costs would be quite substantial. And here's another thought, Pedro. I think that we have limited resources. We're endlessly being told we actually need to cut our defense budget. My view of this is there ought to be a division of labor. We've had our European allies who have generally not pulled their load on most national security issues for a long time, nonetheless saying that if only because they're worried about large numbers of refugees coming out of North Africa to their shores, they want to stabilize this situation. They're talking about putting a no-fly zone in place. I don't know whether they will or actually are simply going to talk about it. But let's let them do that. And let's focus our energies on helping what is unmistakably a popular effort to remove a regime that is unmistakably actually more dangerous than that of Muammar Gaddafi to us, and that has been laboring longer and harder in a way that makes it, I think, pretty clear that those people would be on our side if their opposition movement came to power. And I'm talking about Iran. So I would delegate to the Europeans working this particular problem, especially since it's so unclear what the cost-benefit would actually turn out to be, and keep our eye on what is absolutely the main prize here, which is ending a regime that is trying to build nuclear weapons with which to threaten us and our allies, and that is actively engaged in terrorism both in the immediate region and in Afghanistan and in the wider world beyond, including in our own hemisphere.
Frank Gaffney, our guest, until 9:15. Questions for him, you can call one of three lines, 202-737-0002, Democrats, 202-737-0001 for Republicans, 202-628-0205 for Independents. Also, you can send us an email at journal@cspan.org and reach us on Twitter at CSPANWJ. Back to your original point about calling or casting this as a civil war. What makes you think that it's not larger than that?
At the moment,
or at least has larger implications.
Yeah, look, it could have larger implications, but at the moment I think what seems to be going on is a relatively small number of people who have armed themselves, either through the voluntary surrender of arms by Gaddafi's forces, or they've liberated some of his weapons caches, or through other means perhaps, who are now in a fight with Gaddafi's regime. The people of Libya are largely out of it, as best I can tell. There were demonstrations early on. They've been suppressed. The people of Libya have been suppressed for decades by this guy. So I think they are more or less on the sidelines. And what you see is armed combatants, some better armed, namely Gaddafi's forces, some less well armed, but nonetheless armed combatants involved in what I think is properly described now as a civil war.
First call for you is Benton, Arkansas. Kenny, Republican line. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I heard Bill O'Reilly mention you last night. Anyway, and so when I seen your name, well, I flipped on. But it seems like, at the point that they're at over there right now, that it would be real easy to, help get him out of there. And I'd be for, trying to supply those oppositions to him.
Yeah. Well, on the Bill O'Reilly point, he seems to be talking about me a lot. I hope he mentioned the other night that he might have me on next week. I hope we'll have a chance to talk together on the set. But on this point, look, I'm in favor of Muammar Gaddafi being toppled. Don't get me wrong. I think he's, as I said, a terrible, barbaric, despotic, terrorist-sponsoring enemy of this country. I have thought so for decades. We have, I think, the capability of attacking him and perhaps killing him. My old boss, Ronald Reagan, tried to do it a while back without success, but it could conceivably be done. But that, let's face it, is an act of war. Again, the other question is, so who takes over if he is gone? And that, I think, is simply unknown at the moment and somewhat of concern if, as I believe would be the case, it is almost certainly going to be people who are also despotic, also barbaric, also totalitarian, also terrorist sponsoring, and we may well have wound up helping them, arming them, if some of the logic of, that let's just help the opponents to Gaddafi were to be followed. So I'm for holding back. Henry Kissinger had an expression in the Iran-Iraq war. He said, I hope they both lose. And that's basically my view of the Islamists on the one hand and the Gaddafi loyalists on the other. If there is an alternative, a genuine democratic, secular alternative that might come to the fore, I'm for helping them. But we haven't seen much evidence of them so far.
So off of Twitter, a viewer mentions what's playing out in the papers this morning, saying that the Arab League might take more of an active role in this.
They might. I haven't seen much evidence that they will. And if they do, what form it will take remains to be seen. They have some capability, and if they do, that would presumably greatly enhance the likelihood that our European allies could play a supporting role and do the job here. I just think we've got triage. We've got a war on in Afghanistan. We've got the remnants of our presence and the effort to stop the Iranians in Iraq that is also taking our energy and resources. We've got people on Capitol Hill and down at the White House who think we ought to cut the devil out of the defense budget, which will make this even more acute. I think we've got to keep our eye on the ball, which is in the Middle East at the moment, trying to ensure that the Iranian regime is checkmated in its efforts to become the hegemon of the region and a nuclear-armed threat to both our friends there and to us.
Miami, Florida next. John, Democrats line.
Yes, Mr. Gaffney. Thank you for taking my call. I just wonder if we shouldn't just stay out of the region completely because, as you've stated, we could get into more trouble than we are at the present time. Take Afghanistan, for example. It is a classic mistake that we went into that country. We never went into it, but we started supplying the opposition to the Russians or the Soviets weapons, which now are being used against us. And this should be a lesson to us. We spent our treasure. Let's just see what works out. Let the dust settle. And let's not rush to judgment on anything. Thank you. I'd be interested in listening to your reply. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very thoughtful question. In a way, you've just made my case for why we should be careful about arming the rebels in Libya. I think the experience with the arming of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan is instructive. In this case, I think there's a very high probability that we're dealing with the Mujahideen of Libya, and that we would, in fact, be putting in their hands arms that would perhaps be used against us or our friends. I guess I have to dissent somewhat from your idea that we just get out of the region altogether. I don't believe that it is in America's interests to create even more vacuums of power to be filled by people who are absolutely hostile to us, whether it's the Iranians, whether it's Sunni adherents to what they call Sharia. And by the way, if I may just flog a book that we've published, 19 top national security practitioners pulled together an assessment of what we call Sharia, the threat to America. And I think it's very instructive in terms of what that ideology, that political, military, legal program represents, and whether it's being wielded by the Sunnis or the Shia, whether it's being wielded by Al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood or others who seek the same end state, those all do, which is to say the triumph worldwide of Sharia under a global theocracy they call the caliphate. That is not in our interests, and I think keeping that from happening requires us, to say nothing of access to energy and our interests more generally strategically in that region, to maintain a presence, to remain engaged in it. And yes, there are complications associated with that, to be sure.
You referred to the Europeans' take on this. From Twitter, someone asked that David Cameron, the PM in the United Kingdom, rushed to shout no-fly zone to limit damage to the UK from its close ties to Gaddafi, and he asked for your comment.
Yeah. Look, as I say, it was a sordid moment in our history when President Bush decided that we would pretend that Muammar Gaddafi had been transformed from all of the things that I described a moment ago to if not an ally exactly, to a partner, a reliable partner. But we looked like we were, very hard line on Gaddafi compared to the Europeans, Italy notably, and both Scotland and Great Britain, which decided for, as best I can tell, purely economic reasons to essentially whitewash Gaddafi and embrace him as a business associate And, you know, you had the spectacle recently of the London School of Economics having to return millions of dollars that it received. You see, you know, a lot of name-calling and finger-pointing about whether the Scots or the British government were most complicit in enabling the man who was basically Gaddafi's fall guy for the Panem 103 murder attack to be released on the grounds that he only had 6 months to live. Well, that was nonsense. It was all about money. And I think that it is, as I say, it besmirches all of our reputations and I think authority that we've done this kind of cynical deal with so odious a character.
Boca Raton, Florida. Ken, Independent Line. Go ahead for Frank Gaffney.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Gaffney, I'm old enough to remember when Eisenhower told the British, the French, and the Israelis to withdraw from the Suez Canal, and Mr. Nasser at that point, at which point he broke every promise he made to Eisenhower. The same situation seems to obtain now in Egypt, where they immediately allowed 2 Iranian gunboats to come through the Suez Canal, and they are also planning to open up the Palestinian, Egyptian border to more missiles for the Hamas and what have you. I also remember President Kennedy's famous ultimatum to the Soviets. Any attack from Cuba or on the United States or any of its allies would require a retaliatory attack on the Soviet Union. I am a great believer in Pax Americana. I believe that we haven't used any of our strength. We really are the paper tigers there because when they blew up the Marines in '82 in Beirut, we left, and of course it gave Hezbollah this opportunity to claim that they had thrown Americans out, and the same thing with the Shah when he left. Why can't we tell the Ahmadinejad and the mullahs and the ayatollahs and whatever, any more attacks anywhere would be considered an attack from Tehran and require a retaliatory attack, and stop these hosannas and hallelujahs, because these, no disrespect to these revolutions, but they're not going to be democratic. They are, as you pointed out, going to be Islamicist. Look at what happened in Turkey. Look at Erdogan. He's turning that into an Islamicist state and sending flotillas and the world, the chorus of, oh, humanitarians, they just, kill people, and they're humanitarians and they're militants, but they're never terrorists.
We'll leave it there.
You've provided a lot of food for thought, and I think very, very thoughtfully so. Just a couple of quick points. I think that what is going on in Egypt at the moment is troubling. You mentioned the gunboats going through, actually one warship and I guess a supply ship, going through the Suez Canal from Iran for the first time since 1979. In Syria, and beginning what the Syrians and the Iranians have said is now going to be the construction of a permanent naval base for Iran in Syria. No good can come of that, not just for our friends in Israel, but I believe for the United States of America, which, by the way, according to former Secretary of the Navy John Lehman, who was responsible when we served in the Reagan administration for bringing to bear the piece of what President Reagan called the philosophy of peace through strength by seeking to build up a 600-ship Navy, pointed out on our radio show, Secure Freedom Radio, a few months ago, that we have not had a permanent naval presence in the Mediterranean for several years now. I don't think most Americans know that, but to the extent that the Iranians are, again, filling a vacuum of power, far from there being Pax Americana, I think what's increasingly emerging is the prospect of a Pax Iranium, I guess you might call it. Iranium being, by the way, a terrific movie, which I commend to all of you. I have a bit part in it, but it's a very sobering wake-up call as to what we're facing from Iran. And speaking of that, let me just say about the prospects for something better coming out of elections in Egypt. We had the army not only allowing the Iranian vessels to go through the Suez Canal, they also, as you mentioned, are lifting effectively the border restrictions on Gaza, which is very problematic for both Israel and I think for us. But also they brought into Tahrir Square, the center of this so-called revolution, a fellow by the name of Youssef al-Qaradawi, one of the most prominent figures in the whole Islamist Sharia world. He has his own television program on Al Jazeera, and he used the speech that he gave to something between 1 million to 2 million Egyptians to call on them to help him pray in the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, onto Jerusalem, in effect, to which he received enthusiastic responses from the Egyptian people. So all of this is to say, if Egypt does in fact hold elections in the very near future, 6 months or so from now, it is almost certainly the case, as I was saying to Pedro, that we'll see the most disciplined, the most organized, the most ruthless of those entities in Egypt today, namely the Muslim Brotherhood, coming to power either temporarily in a coalition government or more likely, in my judgment, at least in short order, becoming the ruling power in Egypt. And that will be very bad for us, not only because of the Suez Canal, which, as you mentioned, is a strategic waterway of great import, not only because Egypt is the most populous Arab nation in the world, but also because Egypt has, over the decades in which we have invested in the Mubarak regime as a partner for peace, the largest American-supplied arsenal in that region. And it's a very ominous thing if that is in the hands. It'll make the problem that we talked with the previous caller about the Mujahideen having Stinger missiles pale into insignificance, because not only will Israel be at great peril, I believe, but I think those arms will migrate into others' hands in ways that will be used against us as well.
So as far as the president and the administration has reacted to these various areas in the Middle East, then what does it mean when you have a situation, a potential power vacuum in Egypt, a potential power vacuum in Libya, and all these other places? There has to, as much as you've talked a little bit about staying out of it, ultimately you have to consider it, especially when it comes to vacuum and power.
Yeah. Well, look, I think there are ways in which we can help people who are genuinely on our side come to power, or at least assert their rights. The Christian Copts in Egypt should get a lot more. Secular groups in Egypt should get a lot more support from us. I do not think we should be endorsing, embracing, or otherwise legitimizing the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'm afraid that's what the administration is starting to do, not just in Egypt, but elsewhere around the world, including, by the way, here, which was sort of touched on in the hearings that Pete King had this week, and it's another topic for another day perhaps, but a very important question on this issue of, is Sharia the threat to America that I think it is? What we should be doing, I think, though, the thing that I believe could make the most enormous difference in the entire Middle East is to deal with the threat posed by the regime in Iran. Help the people of Iran who are seeking freedom authentically, because they've been obliged to live under Sharia since 1979 and have no stomach for it, want to be freed from it. Those are the folks I think we should be helping. Were we to do that, I believe an awful lot of the other problems that might otherwise arise can be mitigated. But dealing symptomatically with some of these problems that, by the way, the Iranians are actively supporting. You know, we hear a lot about the Shias and the Sunnis don't get along. That's true, except to the extent that they make common cause against us. And there's lots of evidence of that, including the Iranian support for Hamas and the extent to which they're working with Youssef al-Qaradawi. In fact, the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, a fellow by the name of Mohammed Badi, was in Tehran just last week, saying that what he wants to see is a Khomeini-like regime installed in Egypt. That's exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood has in mind. That's not going to be good for us, or I think freedom-loving people more generally.
15 minutes with our guest, Frank Gaffney, Gino, Vancouver, Canada.
So, Pedro, Frank, you sound almost like a fan of Gaddafi. I have a question, actually. Dictator Gaddafi, I want to give you a brief on Libya. I traveled to Africa and that region. Dictator Gaddafi has killed over 500,000 of the Libyan people. You can't call it his people because he's killing the Libyans. Legally, two facts. Sanctions and no-fly zone are worthless. They will not work, and here's why. During the years, the 80s and 90s, the sanctions, he set up banks and offices, almost like another country, almost another Libya, in Malta and southern France. So, and then Italy. So sanctioning and no-fly zone are completely there with us now. He's massacring people with his tanks as we speak. But I want to also tell you, as I have expertise in some languages, in his 5 hours, Gaddafi's 5 hours daily speech, he mentioned two things, which is very scary. I happen to be a dark-skinned person. He said he will flood Europe if they take him out. If he dies or something happens, he will flood Europe with black African. Look it up. So, and the other thing he said, he would be selling scores. This is one more thing, that they should remove this lunatic. He should be selling scores when you name the country, the U.S., some of the European country, Israel. What the Libyan opposition, by the way, Mr. Gaffney, they're very moderate for the most part. They're very moderate. They're educated in the U.S. and Canada and also in Europe. So he explained you don't know about the opposition. They should at least maybe recognize them, maybe supply them with a humanitarian aid. But this is the same guy, Frank, who for 42 years have sponsored the killing of the Pan Am 101, the Munich, the German clubs, on and on. He killed probably thousands and thousands of other countries' citizens. He'll be selling the scores with his money. This menace, this nutcase got to be moved. But
we'll leave it there, caller. Put a lot out there for our guests.
No, look, it's stuff with which I basically agree. I'm not so sure about the character of the opposition. As I said, I'm agnostic on it. There's some indications that it is not moderate, that it is Islamist in character. My guess is it's some of both. I think there are unquestionably people in Libya who want to be free and who want Gaddafi to go. I want Gaddafi to go. I said, I think, several times in the course of the interview here, I think it's an abomination that he has held on to power as long as he had, in part with our help, at least for the past 6 years or so. My concern remains that were we to take action to kill him, which seems to me to be the best thing we could do at the moment, we don't know what happens next. Is that an argument for not taking that step? Well, not necessarily, but it does seem you ought to have a better handle on what will be the upshot of it before you take that step. And to the extent that we can have others, notably Europeans, who have an even higher stake in this than we do, I think, because of the extent to which they must be worried about, if not black Africans, other Africans, Libyans or others, coming to their shores as these regimes fall. Let them take care of it. We can provide support, but let's keep our eye. Let's keep our focus. Let's do much more to remove another despotic regime, namely that of Iran.
Secretary of State Clinton plans to meet with opposition forces in Libya next week. Significance of that?
Well, she may have an opportunity to find out who they are, for one thing. She may have an opportunity to establish whether, as I say, they are principally folks who don't have much use for either, except perhaps as a vehicle for getting rid of their present oppressor and impediment to their coming to power.
Would she set up meetings with those type of groups?
Well, to the extent she's setting up meetings with the opposition, and they constitute, as I believe, probably the bulk of the opposition, she will by definition be setting up meetings with those groups. What she says to them, what she does with them, remains to be seen, but she's certainly leaning, as I think the President did a bit yesterday in his remarks, leaning in the direction of doing what some of our European allies have done, which is recognizing them.
Next call is Memphis, Tennessee, for Frank Gaffney. Lancine, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to say, you know, Gaddafi is in power since 42 years, okay? And Gaddafi got a lot of connection. And before the international community going to make action against Gaddafi, he already win the war. And if he win the war before they take the no-fly zone, what they going to do? They going to come take him out of power, or they going to keep him on the power? Because Gaddafi got a lot of connection, and he always win the war with the opposition. You know, the opposition don't have no army against him. And when they're going to do a no-fly zone, he already done in a couple of days before everybody be okay to say, okay, we're going to make the fly zone start next week or next month. He already finished. That's my question. Why?
Yeah, that's, I think what's in prospect, the Director of National Intelligence, General Jim Clapper, said to some consternation on Capitol Hill this week that he thought Gaddafi was going to prevail. So your assessment is, I think, probably right. What I guess will happen if he does manage to tamp down this uprising, rebellion, this civil war, whatever you want to call it, is that governments elsewhere around the world who have now adopted the position that he is, again, a brutal dictator, a menace, a man who should not remain in power, is to presumably act in ways that will remove him from power or otherwise at least restrict his ability to operate. But what I must tell you I'm fearful of is that we'll see an awful lot of these folks doing what they've done at least once before now, perhaps even our own government, once he's reestablished control, and that is finding some way to get back into bed with him, to do business with him, to buy oil from him, to otherwise, underwrite his regime. That would be, again, an abomination if it happens. And I'd like not to see that. It's just that my hope that both of these parties will lose is something I don't think we can affect as a practical matter, certainly not without knowing more about who the alternatives are.
Miami, Florida, thanks for waiting. Lucy, Republican line.
Yes, thank you for giving me this time. I believe that Gaddafi should be overthrown, and any of our empowerment that we have, all the power that we have as the United States of America, and bringing the people that bring freedom, they are all looking up to us. And so why not help these people that deserve democracy in some way? Now, another of your listeners did mention that right after we're going to have chaos in the country. I do not believe that. I believe that we are, as a nation, intelligent enough that if we are going to go to a country and help them, we already have our people here in intelligence and a strategy of what to do right after. I would like to pose that question to you.
Yeah, I have a slightly less high expectation of our intelligence services. It was instructive when we went to war in Iraq. We had no people on the ground at all there, no firsthand assets of our own in place. I would be surprised if we have much more in Libya today. We have typically, over the years, relied upon what are called liaison services to provide intelligence about some of these places that are hard to operate in, dangerous to operate in for human intelligence, operative spies, whatever you want to call them. And therefore, my guess is that just as we have found our intelligence community surprised by a lot of things that have been happening in the Middle East lately, they're not going to be terribly well equipped to ensure that there is not chaos in the aftermath of the success of the opposition, should that happen. But my point is not so much that there will be chaos as that there will be a consolidation of power in Libya by people who are, if anything, even more of a peril to the United States, namely the Muslim Brotherhood or their, like-minded Sharia-adherent groups and operations. That, I am in favor of Muammar Gaddafi's overthrow. I want to be clear about that. I am not an admirer of his. I am not interested in having him remain in power. It's a different question altogether than saying, let's help, let's arm, let's otherwise bring to power the Muslim Brotherhood or some other faction that has a similar desire not to look up to us, as you put it, but I think to destroy us, as the Muslim Brotherhood's credo requires.
6 million people in the country. The median age is 24 years, and there's a 30% unemployment rate. How does all that factor into the future?
Well, it's what I think in part this restiveness has been expressed is because of those demographics. They're not dissimilar from those elsewhere in the region. Mm-hmm. You've had a tremendous bulge in the youth population relative to the rest of the population. Many of them are unemployed. Many of them have very few prospects of employment. There is, I'm afraid, especially if Sharia takes hold, even fewer prospects for economic betterment. The history of these regimes where they operate is not good under Sharia. I think for the very reason you've mentioned, though, Pedro, we're likely to see, even if Gaddafi is able somehow to, suppress the present revolt, continuing unrest and turmoil in that country. And that may not be an altogether bad thing. As I say, if the best thing for us, and I am looking at it from the American perspective, the American national security perspective most especially, is to keep both Gaddafi and the Muslim Brotherhood at each other's throats rather than at ours.
Waldorf, Maryland. Rosalind on our Democrats line.
Yes, good morning, Pedro, and thank you so much, C-SPAN. Mr. Gaffney, here is the thing. You keep mentioning the Muslim Brotherhood, Mm-hmm. As you know, when Egypt kicked the Muslim Brotherhood out, Saudi Arabia took them in. Mm-hmm. And I would just like to know to what extent our hypocrisy concerning Saudi Arabia and their, 90 to 120, $1 billion worth of spreading the, and then you keep talking about Sharia law.
Mm-hmm.
Other countries in the world right now, we've got BP, Shell, Halliburton, and Transocean doing deep water drilling right off the coast of Libya. We have had other countries begging us, the Philippines, the Netherlands, Italy, on the radicalization that occurs and comes out of Saudi Arabia. And it is unfair, and I mean really unfair, and it also offends me as an American. And my husband is 23 years retired USN CEC, and we have seen this in other countries. So how in the world can you sit there on a morning show and you do this song and dance when you know that every think tank, left, right, and center, and the State Department cables coming out of the WikiLeaks has said that it is the Saudis who killed us in Iraq, the Saudis who killed us on 9/11, and the Saudis who are the master bomb makers that are killing our soldiers in Afghanistan as we speak, and you're on this show. And I would sure as hell like for you to answer that question.
We'll let him answer it.
Thank you. I commend to you this book, Sharia, the Threat to America. It is all about the Saudi connection to Sharia, to promoting it, to seeking to impose it upon us and other freedom-loving people. You will find no one, I think, in any think tank in Washington who is more assiduous than I am in criticizing the Saudi royal family, the Saudi businesses, the Saudi entrepreneurs, the Saudi individuals who are greatly underwriting and otherwise enabling the threat that Sharia represents to all of us. Just one example, the Saudi government funds an organization called the North American Islamic Trust. It is, as you say, a Muslim Brotherhood Front organization. It is used to purchase and own the mortgages of mosques all over this country. With those mosques, mortgages, come the imams, often trained in Saudi Arabia or with Saudi support. There also comes the videos, the books, the magazines, the textbooks for the madrasas. In other words, the complete Sharia support kit, which is being put into mosques by some estimates as many as 80% of them in this country, and turning those mosques into institutions used by the Muslim Brotherhood to help undermine our own constitutional form of government and to seek, through stealthy means, by and large now, Sharia's imposition in this country. That is absolutely part of this problem. You're right. I'm so glad you called to point it out. The fact that we have not talked about what's going to happen in Saudi Arabia is unfortunately a function, I guess, of time and the interest at the moment on Libya. But I am very much with you that the Muslim Brotherhood and the support it gets from our so-called friends, the Saudis, who have played at best a double game for decades, supporting, yes, the sale of oil at prices that are sometimes helpful to us and often not, under OPEC, which they manipulate, and almost in every other respect, aside from buying arms, which is a double-edged sword, they are on the other side, I'm afraid, and we have never held them to account for that. It is a scandal, and it will be, I'm sure, to our great detriment if we don't take corrective action.
Frank Gaffney, the Center for Security Policy, the President and CEO, the centerforsecuritypolicy.org is the website, and you can see its front page. Mr. Gaffney, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Pedro.